What do you do when your ex-husband invites you to his baby shower, only to mock you for not having children? You show up. But not alone. It wasn't the invitation itself that caught me off guard. It was the timing. When I first saw the envelope, I almost tossed it aside, thinking it was just another one of those things that came with the holidays. Another card, another empty gesture. But as soon as I opened it, I felt a sinking sensation in my stomach. I hadn't spoken to Thomas in over 5 years. 5 years since he left me. 5 years since I had been discarded like an old photograph tucked in a drawer. And here he was, reaching out with an invitation to his new life, as if everything between us could be erased by a simple envelope and a stamp. The invitation was elegant, too elegant. It was printed on thick, cream-colored paper with gold accents. "You're invited! A celebration of new beginnings." At first glance, I thought it was for a wedding. It wasn't until I read further that the cruel reality set in. It was for a baby shower. His baby shower for his new wife. For the child they were about to welcome into the world. I sat there for a long time, staring at those words, trying to make sense of them. Trying to remember how we once shared everything, from morning coffees to whispered secrets at night. I had loved him. No, I still loved him, in the way you love someone who has become a distant memory. The love that lingers even after the hurt, even after the years. But the betrayal, oh, the betrayal, was still fresh. I thought about tearing the invitation into tiny pieces, throwing it away like it was nothing, just a reminder of a life that had long since faded. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the bitterness. Maybe it was the years of silence, the years of loneliness, of being dismissed like I didn't matter anymore. Whatever it was, I made up my mind that I wasn't going to be ignored any longer. So, I replied. I didn't call or write a long message. I simply marked my calendar. Yes, I would attend. I would show up. The thought alone filled me with a strange sense of power. Maybe he thought he could mock me. Maybe he thought I'd stay in the background, silent and out of sight. But I wasn't going to be the woman who let herself be pushed aside. Not anymore. I found myself thinking about all the times I had wished things had turned out differently, about all the times I had wanted children. And, of course, it wasn't just about the children. It was about the family we never had, the life that never came to be. The dreams we had built, only to see them crumble when he decided he didn't want to try anymore. He left, and I was left to pick up the pieces. But now, things were different. I wasn't the same woman who had sat at home waiting for a call, for a sign, for a change. I had moved on, or at least I thought I had. I had rebuilt my life in the quietest way possible, alone. But still, my days had a rhythm now, and I was okay with that. But here's the thing. What was the point of showing up to mock me? What was the point of rubbing his new life in my face? And more importantly, why was I letting it bother me? He had moved on. He had his family now. Why did it still sting? I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming back, whispering doubts into my mind. And that's when I realized something. He had underestimated me. He thought I was the woman who would quietly fade into the background, the woman who wouldn't fight back. He thought I was the woman who could be discarded like an old memory. But he was wrong. No, I wouldn't fade away. I would show up. And I would show him that I had something far greater than he ever could have imagined. But here's the twist. I wasn't going to show up alone. I had spent years wondering what my life would have been like if I had children. I used to dream of it, of walking through parks with a little one in tow, of rocking a baby to sleep while soft music played in the background. Those were dreams, of course, dreams that never came to be. But there was a part of me that always wondered what it would have been like if I had built a life like that. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something important. I had something now that would make that baby shower interesting. Something he never saw coming. Something that would change everything. I had quadruplets. 4 beautiful, amazing children. No, they weren't biologically mine, but they had been part of my life in a way I could never have predicted. I had watched them grow, and I loved them as if they were my own. In a world where I thought I had missed out, I had found a family of my own. It was a joke, wasn't it? A cruel joke, but one that I could flip in a way that would make everyone in that room stop, look, and remember one thing. You don't get to mock someone like me and get away with it. Not anymore. So I packed up my things, called the children, and told them to get ready. It was time to crash the party. The car ride felt longer than it should have. As I looked out the window, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had led me to this moment. The silence between us, my quadruplets and me, was comforting, though. They didn't need to say a word. Their presence was enough. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to, but I felt it there, swirling around us like a heavy fog. It was impossible to ignore. Thomas and I had shared a life once. A good life, or so I thought. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect. We were young and in love, full of dreams, of a future that we would build together. We didn't rush into anything. It was a slow burn, a steady progression. I remember how we spent those early years working side by side at Sullivan's Garden Center. The hours were long, but they never felt like work. He would make me laugh, and I would remind him to take a break. It was the kind of partnership that felt solid, unbreakable. But nothing lasts forever, does it? As time passed, the cracks started to show. The first hint of something wrong came when Thomas became distant. The man who once shared everything with me, his hopes, his frustrations, his little dreams about growing the business into something bigger, began to retreat into himself. At first, I thought it was the stress. We had grown the garden center into a respected business, but it was a constant uphill battle. There were bills to pay, customers to keep happy, and suppliers to manage. I understood that pressure, but what I didn't understand was why he was shutting me out. I tried to be patient, giving him space, thinking it was just a phase. I focused more on the business, hoping that keeping things running smoothly would distract us both from whatever was eating at him. But it wasn't long before I began to notice the signs, small things at first. He'd disappear for hours at a time, often without saying where he was going. He'd leave me alone on Sundays, the days we used to spend together, just the two of us. And when he was home, he'd be distant, lost in his thoughts, never really present. I confronted him, of course. What else could I do? I asked him if something was wrong, if there was something I wasn't seeing. He told me it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But I wasn't imagining it. And then came the night that changed everything. I remember it vividly. We had just finished dinner, and we were sitting on the porch, the evening air warm against our skin. I asked him again, "What's going on, Thomas? You're pulling away from me." He looked at me for a long time, his eyes tired like he was carrying a heavy weight. Finally, he sighed, his voice almost a whisper. "I've been thinking, Margaret. I think we've grown apart." The words hit me like a slap. I felt the blood rush to my face, my heart hammering in my chest. "What do you mean, grown apart? We've been together for so long. We built this life together." "I know," he said, his voice breaking a little. "But I don't think I can do this anymore. I don't think I can be the man you need." It felt like the ground beneath me was shaking, but I stayed still. I wanted to scream, to ask him why, to make him understand how much it hurt. But instead, I just nodded, like I had already known this moment was coming, even if I hadn't been ready for it. He left that night. Just like that. There was no fight, no drawn-out argument, no chance to fix things. He just packed up his things and walked out the door. No goodbye, no explanation. I was left in the silence, in the space where our life had once been, trying to make sense of what had happened. And in the years that followed, nothing was ever the same. It was as if the person I had spent so much time loving, the man who had once been my partner, my confidant, had simply vanished. I tried to keep going, tried to rebuild what was left of my life. But every time I looked at the garden center, every time I saw our old house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something crucial. The years went by and I learned to live without him. I made peace with being alone, even if it wasn't the life I had envisioned. I focused on my work, on finding small joys where I could, and, most importantly, on my quiet, simple routine. I was content in my own way, but deep down, I knew that something was still missing. And then, when I thought I had finally put everything behind me, he showed up again. Not physically, but with his invitation to the baby shower. He thought he could mock me, humiliate me. After all, I was the woman who never had children, the woman who had failed to keep the family together. I was the woman he had left behind when things got hard. But what he didn't know, what he could never have known, was that I had rebuilt myself. I wasn't the same woman who had watched him walk out that door. The truth was, I had grown stronger in the absence of the life he had promised me. I had learned that I didn't need him or anyone else to define my worth. I was my own person now, and I didn't need his approval. He might have thought he was throwing a party to celebrate his new life. But I wasn't going to let him forget about the old one, the one we built together. And I wasn't going to let him forget about me. I knew I had to go. There was no question in my mind anymore. The decision had been made, but still, my heart fluttered with hesitation, just for a moment. How strange it was to feel this kind of fear at my age. At 71, I had lived through more than most people could ever imagine. But something about this invitation made my pulse quicken in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't fear of him. No, it wasn't fear of Thomas at all. It was something deeper, something more personal, the fear of confronting my own past. For years, I had kept my distance from everything that reminded me of him, of us. I avoided the places where we once spent time together. The memories that had once felt so warm now felt like chains, holding me to a version of myself I didn't want to acknowledge. I had lived a quiet life in the years since our divorce, surrounded by the routine of gardening and the peaceful solitude of my home. And yet, this invitation had cracked something open within me. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend that I hadn't been affected by it, but why? Why was it so hard to let go of the past when I thought I had moved on? Why did his invitation still matter to me? The thought gnawed at me as I sat there, looking at the invitation one last time. It wasn't just about the baby shower. It was about everything that had happened before. About all the things I had never said to him. About the years of silence that had accumulated between us. And then, it clicked. It wasn't about Thomas. It wasn't even about the baby shower. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my voice. The years after our divorce had been long, and they had been lonely, but they had also been filled with lessons. Lessons about who I was without him. About what it meant to find strength in solitude. I had spent so much time trying to move on, trying to make sense of what had happened, that I had forgotten the most important thing. I had been the one who had been left behind. Yes, but I had also been the one who stayed strong. I had been the one who had continued to work, to build, to survive. No, I wasn't going to let him mock me. Not anymore. I wasn't going to let him think he could invite me into his life just to make a spectacle out of my pain. Not when I had come this far. Not when I had finally started to believe in my own worth again. I looked at the clock on the wall. The invitation had come a week ago, and the baby shower was only 2 days away. I hadn't made a decision yet, hadn't told anyone I was going. Not even the kids. They would have no idea what I was about to do. But it didn't matter. This wasn't for them. This was for me. The plan formed in my mind slowly, almost like a whisper. But as it took shape, I knew it was the right thing to do. I wasn't going to show up as some weak, discarded woman. I wasn't going to be the one who bowed her head in the face of mockery. No, I was going to walk into that room, head held high, not as a forgotten ex-wife, but as someone who had built a new life, someone who had a family of her own. I smiled to myself as I thought about it. There was something poetic about the whole thing, wasn't there? He had invited me to a celebration of his new life, a life he had built without me. But what he didn't know was that I had built something too. Something that could never be taken away, no matter how hard he tried. I stood up and walked over to my closet, my mind made up. I didn't need to ask for permission to live my life. I didn't need anyone's approval, especially not his. For so long I had felt like I was missing something, like there was a piece of my life that had been taken from me when he left. But now, looking at the invitation in my hands, I realized that nothing had been taken from me. I had everything I needed right here. As I rummaged through my closet, I pulled out a dress I hadn't worn in years. It was simple but elegant, just the right amount of boldness to remind anyone who saw me that I was not the woman they thought I was. I ran my fingers over the fabric, feeling the weight of the decision settle in my chest. This was the woman I was going to be. The woman who would walk into that baby shower and remind them all that I wasn't invisible. That I wasn't a woman to be mocked. I made the call that night I called the Quadruplets. I hadn't told them about Thomas or the invitation, not yet. But now, I could feel my heart racing with excitement as I dialed their numbers. Each one of them picked up on the first ring, their voices cheerful and unaware of what I was planning. They were more than children to me. They were my family. I had spent enough time with them to know they'd be eager to help, eager to do something for me. When I explained the plan, there was a pause on the other end of the line. And then, without hesitation, they all agreed. It felt right, even in the silence of the moment. It felt like justice, like the first step toward something new. It wasn't about showing up to prove something to Thomas. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about showing myself that I could still take control of my own narrative, that I wasn't bound by the past, that I was free to make whatever choices I wanted, regardless of what anyone expected of me. I put down the phone, my decision final. Tomorrow, I would prepare for a day that would change everything. The day had arrived. I had everything ready, my outfit, my plan, and most importantly, my resolve. But as I stood at the edge of the driveway, staring at the house, I felt a pang of doubt. For a split second, I questioned myself. Was this the right thing to do? Was I really ready to face him, to face them all? But then I remembered something. The only reason I was standing here in the first place was because I had been underestimated for far too long. They thought they could throw me away and I'd never come back. They thought I would fade into the background, a relic of a past life they could forget about. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I had built my own life, one they didn't know about, one they could never take away. I took a deep breath, pushing the doubt away. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. As I walked up to the front door, I could feel the eyes on me, even though no one had yet seen me. I could feel the tension in the air, the expectations, the judgment. I had been the outsider for so long, the one who had been left behind. But today, I wasn't going to be the one who was dismissed. I was going to make sure of that. The doorbell rang in my ears as I pressed the button, and for a moment, everything felt still. I could hear voices on the other side, laughter, chatter, the clinking of glasses. It sounded like any other baby shower, filled with the joy of new beginnings, of expectations for the future. But beneath it all, I knew something was different. Something was about to change. The door opened, and there he was. Thomas. He stood there with a forced smile, his eyes betraying a hint of surprise, perhaps even confusion. He wasn't expecting me. I could see it in his face. His grip tightened on the doorframe as if holding on to something familiar, something safe. But that safety was no longer mine to provide. "Well, well, Margaret," he said, his voice strained, though he tried to keep it light. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come. But here you are." I didn't say anything at first. I simply stood there taking in the sight of him. He was older, of course. A few more lines on his face, a few more gray hairs at the temples. But his posture was still the same, always upright, always trying to maintain control. It was the same Thomas, the one I had loved once, the one I had trusted, the one I had believed in. But that was before everything had fallen apart. That was before he'd thrown me aside like I didn't matter, like I was nothing more than a faded memory. I gave him a smile, cool and calm. "I wouldn't miss it," I said, stepping over the threshold and into the house. Wouldn't want to be rude. The tension in the air thickened as I walked in, and I could feel every set of eyes on me. I wasn't imagining it. They were watching, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to show any sign of weakness. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Not today. I looked around the room, taking in the scene. It was just as I had imagined. Decorations in soft pastel colors, balloons floating above, a table piled high with gifts. It was everything a baby shower should be. But there was something strange about it. Something that felt off. And that's when I saw her. His new wife. She was sitting on the couch, talking with some of the guests. She looked happy, expectant, full of life. But there was something else in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. She looked at me for a moment, her gaze lingering a little too long, and I couldn't help but notice the faint trace of smugness on her face. As if she knew exactly why I was here. I turned my attention back to Thomas, who had followed me into the living room, still wearing that forced smile. He tried to make small talk, asking about my life since the divorce, about the things I had been up to. It was all so painfully rehearsed, and I could see right through it. He was trying to regain control of the situation, trying to steer it back into safer waters. But it wasn't going to work. Not this time. I didn't answer his questions right away. Instead, I let the silence linger for just a moment too long. I wanted him to feel the weight of it. The silence that had hung between us for years. The silence that spoke volumes about everything left unsaid. Finally, I broke the silence. "I've been doing well, Thomas," I said, my voice steady. "Really well." I could see the uncertainty flash across his face, the shift in his expression. But I wasn't here to engage in a battle of words. I wasn't here to dredge up old wounds. No, today was about something else entirely. I was here to show him that I was not the woman he had left behind. I was not the forgotten ex-wife. I was not the weak woman who had been cast aside in favor of something new. No, I was here to show him, and everyone in this room, that I had built something far more powerful than he could ever imagine. And that was when I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind me. I turned, and there they were, my quadruplets, 4 of the most beautiful children I had ever known. They were smiling, laughing, full of life, and they walked right up to me, standing by my side as if they had always belonged there. Thomas's smile faltered for just a second. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected me to show up with them. With my family. His new life was supposed to be the shining example, the fresh start. But now it was suddenly clear, my past wasn't as forgotten as he thought, and I hadn't come alone. The room fell silent, like the world itself was holding its breath. I could feel their eyes on me, on us, and for a brief moment I let myself savor it. The surprise, the confusion, the realization that something had shifted. For years I had been the one who was pushed aside, ignored, mocked. And now, here I was, standing at the center of it all, not as the forgotten ex-wife, but as someone who had built something they hadn't anticipated. Thomas's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. His eyes widened, his lips parting slightly in shock. He had expected me to walk in alone, maybe with a quiet dignity, maybe even broken in some way. He certainly hadn't expected to see 4 children standing by my side, their eyes bright with excitement, their laughter ringing through the room like a chorus of joy. His gaze flicked from me to them and back again, the color draining from his face. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes as he tried to piece together what this all meant. The one thing he hadn't anticipated, the one thing I hadn't anticipated, was the surprise I had brought with me. "You? Brought them?" Thomas stammered, his voice wavering slightly. I stood tall, meeting his gaze with a calmness I didn't know I had until this moment. "Yes," I said simply. "I did." The quadruplets giggled, not aware of the significance of this moment. They were just being themselves, happy, carefree, full of life. Their innocence was a stark contrast to the tension that suddenly filled the room. I could see the guests shifting uncomfortably, whispering to each other in hushed tones. I heard a few murmurs, some uncertain, others intrigued, but all of them were watching, waiting for what would happen next. Thomas recovered his composure quickly, though I could tell it cost him. He cleared his throat and forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I didn't expect you to bring, well, this. He gestured vaguely to the children, though the words hung in the air, awkward and heavy. I thought you'd come alone. Did you? I asked, my voice steady. Did you really think that I would show up at your baby shower to be mocked? To be humiliated by you in your new life? No, Thomas. I came to show you something else. He blinked, clearly caught off guard by my directness, but I wasn't going to play games with him anymore. He had underestimated me for the last time. It wasn't about him, or even about the past anymore. It was about me taking control of my own narrative, of reclaiming my power after years of being dismissed and belittled. It was about standing tall and letting everyone in that room know that I wasn't the weak, childless woman he had left behind. I was someone who had built a life, a family, one that was mine and mine alone. I'm not here to disrupt your celebration, Thomas, I continued, my gaze never leaving his. I'm here to remind you that life doesn't end when someone leaves you behind. It doesn't stop because you're no longer part of the picture. I have a family now, one that I created, one that I love and cherish. He didn't say anything for a moment, his lips pressing into a thin line. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wasn't sure whether to be angry, confused, or simply embarrassed. But whatever it was clear that this wasn't the moment he had planned. This wasn't the baby shower he had envisioned. As the silence stretched on, I turned my attention to the rest of the room. The guests who had been murmuring among themselves had now fallen completely quiet. There was no judgment in their eyes, only curiosity and surprise. They hadn't expected this. None of them had. And in that moment, I realized something. They didn't really care about the past. They didn't care about the drama or the years of hurt. What they cared about was the strength they saw in front of them. They saw someone who had taken the broken pieces of her life and made something beautiful. That was the gift I had given myself. I could feel Thomas's gaze burning into the back of my neck as I stood there with the children. But I refused to turn around. I wasn't going to shrink back from this. Not now. Not when everything had led to this moment. His attempt to humiliate me was falling apart before his eyes, and I wasn't going to let him recover from it. Not this time. So, how are the kids? One of the guests, someone I didn't know, asked, breaking the silence. It was a simple question, but it felt like a lifeline. A bridge between the tension and the uncomfortable air that had settled in the room. They're doing great, I replied, my tone warm as I turned toward the children, who were eagerly looking around the room, taking in the new faces. They're the light of my life, Thomas's smile faltered again. His mouth opened as if he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I could see it in his eyes now. The realization that he had underestimated me, that he had believed I would be a footnote in his story when, in reality, I was the one who had been writing my own. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. Here he was, standing in front of his friends and family, trying to project the image of the man who had moved on, the man with a new life. But the truth was, his past was standing right in front of him, and this time, it wasn't going anywhere. Look at them, Thomas, I said, my voice quiet but firm. These are the people who matter. Not you, not the life we had. The life I'm building now, that's what matters. For a moment, I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, perhaps. Or maybe jealousy. I couldn't be sure. But whatever it was, I wasn't going to be the one to fix it anymore. That part of me was gone. And as the moments ticked by, I realized something else. I wasn't just proving a point to him. I was proving it to myself. Thomas's face had drained of color, his eyes flickering between the children and me, as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. There was no pretending, no way to brush it off. This was not the day he had planned. This wasn't just an awkward moment. This was a reckoning, and it was happening right in front of him. For a moment, he said nothing. His lips parted, then closed again, as if he couldn't find the words to match the situation. He looked around the room, searching for an escape, for a way to regain control of a situation that was spiraling out of his grasp. Well, I didn't expect... His voice trailed off as he tried again, stumbling over the words, clearly thrown off balance by the sight of the children standing beside me. I thought you'd come here alone, Margaret. I didn't think this was the way you'd do it. I stood there silent for a moment, letting his confusion fill the space between us. He was scrambling for control, trying to find his footing, but I wasn't going to offer him that luxury. For so long, I had allowed him to dictate the terms of our relationship, to control how things unfolded between us. But this was my moment, and I was going to savor it. Well, Thomas, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the awkward tension like a knife. You thought wrong. I'm not the woman you left behind. I'm not the woman who would sit in the background, quietly accepting your disrespect. His eyes flicked to the guests, who had been observing in stunned silence, before returning to me. I could see the old habits resurfacing, his need to control, to manipulate, to maintain the upper hand. But it wasn't going to work anymore. Not with me. You've always had a way of making everything about you, I continued, watching as his jaw tightened. But today, Thomas, it's not about you. It's about me. It's about the life I've built, the family I've created, and it's about time you realize that you don't get to call the shots anymore. His lips curled into a tight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. I wasn't trying to make it about me, Margaret. I didn't expect this. I didn't think you'd come with... He gestured vaguely to the children, struggling to find the right words. With them? Why? Because I'm supposed to be the lonely ex-wife who never moved on? I asked, my voice now sharp with a hint of bitterness that I couldn't quite hide. That's what you expected, isn't it? That I'd fade away, quietly forgotten while you moved on with your perfect life. He shifted uncomfortably, but I wasn't about to let him off the hook. Not after everything he had put me through. Not after all the years of trying to make him see me for more than just a woman he had discarded. Let me remind you of something. Thomas, I said, my gaze fixed on him, unwavering. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who worked day in and day out, building a life with you. I sacrificed so much to make sure you had everything you needed. And when you couldn't even give me the decency of a conversation, when you couldn't even tell me what was really happening between us, I stayed quiet. I stayed because I thought I had to, but not anymore. Not today. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, he said nothing. He looked at me with something that almost resembled regret, but I wasn't interested in his apologies. Not anymore. Don't pretend you didn't know what you were doing, I pressed, stepping a little closer, feeling the heat of my own anger rising. You used me. You used me for years, Thomas. You took everything I gave you, and when you were done, you just walked away. You think you can just pick up where you left off? That I'd be content to play the role of the ex-wife who's still pining for you? He opened his mouth, but I cut him off before he could speak. No, not anymore. You've made your choices. You made them long before this day. For the first time since I walked into the house, I saw him falter. He took a step back, the mask of confidence slipping just for a moment. And in that moment, I knew I had him. He had never expected this version of me. The woman standing in front of him wasn't the quiet, broken wife he had left behind. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, and now I was standing in front of him, strong and resolute. I wasn't going to let him off easy. Not after everything he had done. Margaret, he said, his voice low, a hint of frustration creeping in. You don't understand. This isn't... I understand perfectly, Thomas, I interrupted, my voice steady. You've always been able to twist the truth to fit your narrative. But not today. Not anymore. His eyes flicked to the guests again, and I could see the guilt flash across his face. Maybe it wasn't just about me anymore. Maybe, for the first time, he realized that the people around him weren't as loyal as he had assumed. Maybe, just maybe, they could see him for what he really was, the man who took advantage of everyone around him. The man who thought he could control everything, even the past. But today, he couldn't control me. You thought I was weak, I said softly, but with a certainty that cut through the tension. You thought I wouldn't fight back. But here I am, Thomas. And here they are. My family, my life, and no matter what you think, You'll never take that away from me." The silence that followed was deafening. His face, still pale, was a mixture of disbelief and frustration, and I could see his mind racing, trying to find a way to regain control. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, like an unspoken agreement between the room and the chaos that had unfolded. I could feel the weight of the gazes pressing into me, each person seemingly frozen in time, unsure of what to make of this unexpected turn of events. It was as if they had all been waiting for me to break, to show weakness, but I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I had spent so many years trying to understand why people treated me the way they did. Why I was always the one left out. Always the one who had to stand in the shadows. For so long, I had let their opinions define my self-worth. I let the whispers and the judgments make me believe that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't worthy of respect, of love, of anything. But now I was standing in front of them, not as a woman who needed their validation, but as someone who had earned her place in the world. A woman who had built her own family, her own life, without their approval. The guests looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, exchanging glances. Some avoided eye contact altogether, as if they were afraid to acknowledge the truth of the situation. They had all been complicit in their quiet judgment of me, of the life I had led, of the choices I had made, or rather the choices I hadn't made. In their eyes, I could hear the murmurs now, barely audible but unmistakable. They thought they were being discreet, but I had spent years listening to whispers like these. It wasn't their words that hurt. It was the way they looked at me, as if I didn't belong in the same room, as if I was some outcast who had no place in their world. "I didn't know she had kids," one voice whispered, though it was loud enough for me to hear. "Isn't she a little old to have babies?" Another voice followed, tinged with judgment. I didn't flinch. Instead, I stood there, holding my ground, feeling the strength rise from within me. I had heard these words before, in different forms. For years, I had been the woman who didn't fit into anyone's box. The woman who had failed to meet the expectations of society. The woman who had been judged for her decisions, her lack of children, her loneliness. But now I wasn't the one being judged. No, today, they were the ones who had to come to terms with the truth I had been hiding in plain sight. The fact that I had quadruplets, that I had a family of my own, had completely thrown them off balance. It wasn't just the shock of the moment. It was the fact that they had all assumed I was a failure. They had assumed that I was a woman who had been left behind, who had never moved on, who would never amount to anything more than a lonely, childless woman. And now, I was showing them otherwise. I could feel the room begin to shift, the whispers growing louder, the discomfort settling like a heavy fog. But I didn't let it faze me. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. I wasn't going to be the woman they thought I was. Thomas shifted uncomfortably next to me, his eyes darting around the room, clearly aware that things were spiraling out of his control. But it wasn't just his discomfort that I noticed. It was the discomfort of the others in the room. They didn't know what to do with me. They didn't know how to process the fact that I was standing there, not as the forgotten ex-wife, but as someone who had built her own life, her own legacy. I could see the judgment in their eyes, but I also saw something else. I saw the spark of recognition, the realization that I was no longer the woman they could dismiss. They couldn't look away from me, couldn't ignore me. I was no longer invisible. "I didn't know you had it in you, Margaret," one of the women, a longtime friend of Thomas's new wife, said quietly, almost as if to herself, though I could hear it clearly. It wasn't a compliment, not really. It was a statement of surprise, of disbelief that I could have come this far. That I could have a family of my own, that I could be standing here, proud and unapologetic. But I didn't need her approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of a few of the guests who were now watching me with something different in their gaze. Respect, maybe, or at the very least, curiosity. I wasn't sure if I could change their opinions of me. I wasn't sure if they would ever see me for who I truly was, for the woman who had survived and thrived despite everything. But I didn't care anymore. What mattered was that I knew my worth. I knew who I had become, and no one could take that away from me. I could feel the weight of their judgment still hanging in the air, but it didn't feel like it had before. This time, I wasn't the one who was small. I wasn't the one who had to shrink away in shame. No, today I was the one who stood tall, the one who had nothing to hide, the one who had made her own way, even when everyone thought she couldn't. "Is this what you wanted, Thomas?" I asked, turning my attention back to him. His face flushed with embarrassment, his lips pressing into a thin line. He was trying to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. I watched him struggle for words. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He didn't know what to say because he realized, deep down, that everything he had ever believed about me was wrong. And it was too late to fix that. I wasn't here to prove anything to him. I wasn't here to win his approval or seek his validation. I was here to show the world that I had always been enough, that I had always had value, even when they didn't see it. And as the murmurs continued around me, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I wasn't here for their approval. I wasn't here to fit into their mold. I was here to take up space, to show them all that I belonged. They had judged me, yes, but I had nothing left to prove. Not anymore. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet but undeniable shift. It wasn't the victory of winning a battle, not the rush of proving someone wrong. It was something deeper, something more profound. The heaviness that had weighed on my chest for so long, the weight of all the years spent living in the shadows of others' expectations, was lifting. I was standing in the middle of that room, among all those people who thought they knew me, who had judged me for so long. And yet, I felt lighter than I had in years. I hadn't come here for them. I hadn't come for Thomas or his wife or anyone else. I had come for me. I had come to remind myself that I was not the woman they thought I was. That I had never been the broken, discarded woman they tried to make me. I had always been more than that. And today, I was reclaiming that truth. I could see the confusion on Thomas's face, the disbelief that his carefully crafted image of me, of the woman he thought I had become, was shattered. But it wasn't just him I was confronting. It was every expectation I had ever internalized. It was every silent judgment I had carried with me over the years. Every moment I had doubted myself because someone else thought I didn't measure up. As the room began to settle, I turned away from Thomas, needing to ground myself in something more tangible, something that wasn't caught up in the past. My eyes wandered to the children, my quadruplets. They were laughing together, playing with a toy one of the guests had given them, oblivious to the storm that had just passed through the room. They were my joy. They were my family, my legacy in a way that didn't need anyone's validation. For a moment, I just watched them. Watched their carefree smiles, their bright eyes filled with wonder at the world. And I felt an overwhelming rush of gratitude. How had I not seen it before? In all the years of pain and disappointment, I had missed the beauty of what I had built, of what I had created. These children, this family, were everything I had ever wanted, everything I had thought I had lost. But the truth was, I hadn't lost anything. I had gained everything. The quiet strength I had spent so many years cultivating had finally come to the surface. I had spent so long hiding my emotions, burying them deep inside, afraid of showing any vulnerability, afraid of being seen as weak. But now, with the children by my side, with the truth finally out in the open, I could feel the cracks in my walls begin to soften. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to wear the mask of the strong, silent woman who had it all together. I didn't have to live up to anyone else's expectations. I had built a life of my own, one that was filled with love, with laughter, with purpose. And nothing, no one could take that away from me. I could feel a weight lifting from my shoulders, as if something I had carried for years was finally being set down. All those years of pretending, of keeping up appearances, of making everyone else comfortable while I quietly crumbled inside. It was over. I was done with it. "Are you all right, Grandma?" one of the children asked, looking up at me with wide eyes. His innocent question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to answer. But then I realized I didn't need to have the perfect answer. "I'm more than all right," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm finally free." It wasn't just a freedom from Thomas or from the expectations of others. It was a freedom from the chains I had wrapped around myself. It was a freedom to finally be myself, unapologetically, to embrace my own strength and my own journey without needing anyone's approval or validation. I turned back to face Thomas, but this time there was no anger in my gaze. There was no bitterness, no desire for revenge. There was only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had found my peace. "You can't change what's already happened," I said, my voice steady but soft. "You can't rewrite the past, but you can choose how you move forward. I've chosen my path. I hope you find yours." His face was a mixture of frustration and regret, but I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need him to fix things. He had made his choices, just as I had made mine. I had done the best I could with what I had, and now I was walking away from the past, from the mistakes, from the hurt, and I felt lighter. The guests around us seemed to sense the shift in energy, and slowly, the tension in the room began to dissipate. Conversations started to pick up again, though I could tell the mood had changed. It was no longer just a baby shower. It had become something more, something that transcended the simple celebration of a new life. It had become a moment of reckoning for me, a moment where I was finally able to let go of the pain and the fear. As I stood there, watching the children run around, laughing, I felt a deep sense of pride. This was the life I had built. Not with Thomas, not with anyone else, but with my own strength, my own resilience. I had created something beautiful, and nothing, no one, could take that from me. "I'm proud of you, Grandma," another one of the children said, running up to me and wrapping their arms around my waist. Their small hands felt like home, warm, steady, and full of love, and for the first time in years I realized something. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Not anymore. I had everything I needed right here in this moment. In these children. In the peace I had found within myself, I was free. The silence that followed my words felt like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, but I didn't look away. I wasn't going to let Thomas or anyone else control this moment. Not anymore. The time for being silent, for allowing others to dictate the course of my life, had ended. Today I was standing in front of him, no longer the broken woman who had been left behind, but the woman who had reclaimed her life, her dignity, her future. Thomas looked at me, his face a mixture of surprise and frustration. I could see the old habits resurface. The man who had once held power over me. The man who thought he could manipulate the situation to his advantage. But now I wasn't that woman. I wasn't going to shrink back from the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made him or anyone else. "You don't understand, Margaret," he said, his voice low but sharp. "This isn't how it was supposed to go. You're making everything harder than it has to be." I stood my ground, my gaze unwavering. "Harder? You think this is hard? You think you've made anything harder than it already was?" Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly unsure of what to say. I could see the guilt flash across his face, but it was quickly replaced by defensiveness. He wasn't ready to admit the truth, not yet. He wasn't ready to face the reality of what he had done. I took a step closer to him, my voice steady but filled with purpose. "Let me make something clear, Thomas. I'm not here to relive the past. I'm not here to argue about who did what or who hurt whom. I'm here to show you something you've clearly forgotten." His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "And what's that?" "The truth," I said simply. "The truth about who I am, the truth about who we were, and the truth about who I've become since you left." He blinked, as though the weight of my words had finally registered. His expression shifted. There was a flicker of realization, a brief moment of vulnerability that he quickly tried to mask. But it was too late. I had already seen it. I had already seen the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. You always thought I was weak, didn't you? I asked, my voice softer now, but carrying the weight of years of resentment. You thought I would crumble, that I'd fall apart without you, that I'd just disappear into the background, quietly accepting whatever scraps you decided to throw my way. He didn't answer, but I could see the guilt creeping back into his eyes. The silence stretched, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. This time it was mine. It was my moment to reclaim everything he had taken from me. I stayed, I continued, the words flowing with the strength I had kept hidden for so long. I stayed when you pulled away. I stayed when you shut me out. I stayed when you didn't have the decency to tell me the truth. I stayed because I thought I had to, because I thought we had built something worth saving. But the truth is, Thomas, you didn't want to save it. You didn't want to save me. The words were out before I could stop them, and I didn't regret a single one. I had spent so many years holding this inside, swallowing my anger and my hurt, trying to protect him, trying to protect us. But now I was done. Now I was speaking my truth, and the relief was immediate. The weight that had burdened me for years, the anger that had been buried deep inside, was finally being released. You never thought I could survive without you, did you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper but steady. You thought that without you I'd be nothing, that without you I'd fade away. But I didn't fade, Thomas. I thrived. His eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw the man I had once loved. But that man was long gone. The man in front of me was nothing but a shadow of what he had been. A man who had made choices, selfish choices, and now had to live with the consequences. I've built something for myself, I continued, my voice rising slightly. I've built a life that's mine. I don't need your validation. I don't need your approval. I never did. Thomas opened his mouth again, but this time I didn't let him speak. I wasn't going to let him interrupt me, not now. Not when I was finally saying everything I had needed to say for so long. I didn't build this life for you, Thomas. I didn't build it to prove anything to you. I built it for me, for the woman I had to become after you left. I built it for the family I now have. I built it for the children who will never know the kind of betrayal you put me through. And I built it to show myself that I am enough. I always have been. There was a long pause as the room fell quiet, the weight of my words settling over us all. I could see it now, the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders slumped slightly. It wasn't regret. It wasn't an apology. It was something far more complicated than that. It was recognition. He was finally seeing me, not as the woman he had abandoned, but as the woman I had become. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We simply stood there, the tension between us palpable but different now. The dynamic had shifted. I wasn't the woman he could push aside anymore. I wasn't the woman he could control, and he knew it. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat, his voice soft, almost hesitant. I never meant for it to be like this, Margaret. I didn't think— No, I interrupted, my voice firm. You didn't think. And that's the problem. You never thought about what I needed, what I wanted. You never thought about me. And that's why I had to walk away. That's why I had to build this life on my own. The words hung in the air, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of everything that had happened start to lift. I had confronted him, confronted my past, and in doing so, I had taken back my power. I didn't need his approval, his apology, or his understanding. I had everything I needed right here. I had myself. The weight of the moment hung in the air long after Thomas had gone quiet. I stood there, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief, watching as the room slowly started to come back to life. The initial shock had worn off, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer about the celebration of his new life. It was about the quiet power of a woman reclaiming her own. I knew this wasn't just a victory for me. It wasn't just about making a point in front of Thomas or the guests. This was about something far deeper, something that would ripple through every part of my life. Today wasn't just about showing them that I wasn't the woman they thought I was. It was about showing myself that I was worthy of love, of respect, and of happiness, no matter what the past had tried to convince me of. I thought back to all the years I had spent hiding in the shadows. afraid to take up too much space. Afraid of being too loud, too demanding, too visible. I had been conditioned to shrink, to apologize for my presence, to accept the scraps that were thrown my way. It was easier that way, or at least I thought it was. But today had shown me the truth. It wasn't easier to shrink. It wasn't easier to stay silent. It was easier to stand up, to speak my truth, and to let the world see me for who I truly was. As I watched the children, who had been blissfully unaware of the storm that had just passed, I realized that I was no longer the same woman who had walked into that baby shower just hours ago. I had already changed. I had already begun to see myself differently. And this change, it wasn't just about what happened today. It was about everything I had gone through, everything I had survived. It was the culmination of every moment that had shaped me, every choice I had made, every tear I had shed in silence. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving Thomas wrong. It was about finding peace within myself. I had spent years trying to make sense of my life after the divorce, trying to figure out where I fit into a world that had once felt like it belonged to me and Thomas. I had always thought that something had been taken from me, that somehow I had lost out on the life I had imagined. But today I saw it clearly. I hadn't lost anything. I had gained everything. I had created a life that was mine, one that no one could take away. There were no more questions about what I had missed, no more wondering about what could have been. I was exactly where I needed to be. As I turned back to the room, my eyes swept over the faces of the guests. I could see the way they were looking at me now, differently. The whispers had quieted, the tension had dissipated, and in its place was something I couldn't quite define. Respect? Maybe. Curiosity? Definitely. But most of all, there was an awareness that I wasn't just the ex-wife. I wasn't just the woman who had been abandoned and forgotten. I was someone who had built something strong and real, something that mattered. I wasn't invisible anymore. I thought about the life I had left behind, the life with Thomas, the life where I had played the role of the dutiful wife, the one who did everything to keep the family together, even when it felt like it was falling apart. I had tried to hold on to that life for so long, trying to fix things to save us, but it wasn't meant to be. The life I had with Thomas wasn't the one I was supposed to have. And now I saw the truth in that. I had been holding on to the wrong things. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about embracing the future, and the future was full of possibilities I had never considered. Looking at the children again, I smiled. This was the future I had fought for. This was the family I had created. This was the life that mattered. They didn't need to know the details of everything that had happened. They didn't need to know how hard it had been for me to get here. All they needed to know was that they were loved, that they were my world, and that nothing, no one, could ever take that away from me. I felt a surge of gratitude. Gratitude for every choice I had made, every step I had taken to rebuild my life, and gratitude for the lesson I had learned, even if it had taken longer than I would have liked. I had spent so many years questioning myself, wondering if I was enough, wondering if I had done something wrong. But now I knew. I had done everything right. I had stayed true to myself, and in the end, that was what mattered most. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself at peace. The tension that had once filled the room had faded, and I was left with the quiet certainty that I had done exactly what needed to be done. I had spoken my truth, and that was enough. I had nothing left to prove. The guests slowly began to disperse, their conversations picking up again, though the air still felt different. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need anyone to tell me I had done the right thing. I knew it, and that was all that mattered. I turned to leave, feeling a sense of finality in my every step. It was time to go home, to the life I had built, to the family that was mine. And as I walked out the door, I realized that I was walking away from the past, from everything that had held me back. I was walking toward my future, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The air in the room was still thick with tension, but I could feel something new stirring within me. The battle had been fought, and it had been won. But the war, as it always does, would leave its marks. As I left the baby shower that day, I felt a strange sense of quiet satisfaction. Not joy, not relief, just a deep, steady knowing that I had done what I needed to do. I had spoken my truth, reclaimed my dignity, and I had done it in a way that no one could deny. The silence in the car as I drove back home was comforting. The children, their faces glowing with the innocent joy of the day, chattered excitedly about the toys and gifts they had received. Their laughter filled the car, and for a moment, I let myself bask in the warmth of their voices. They were the reason I had done this. They were the reason I had found the courage to walk into that room, to face the people who had once dismissed me. They had given me a strength I hadn't known I had. I thought back to the way the room had shifted when I entered with them. Thomas, stunned and speechless. The guests whispering among themselves. I had never imagined that my presence, my very existence, could shake them so deeply. For so long, I had lived in the shadows of my past, the woman who was expected to fade away, to shrink into the background. But today that all changed. Today, I had stepped into the light, and the world was forced to reckon with me. As I pulled into the driveway, I was met with the familiar comfort of home, the place where I had built my life, where I had learned to find peace. The garden was blooming, just as it always did at this time of year. The roses were in full bloom, their sweet fragrance filling the air, and the lavender was starting to show its vibrant purple spikes. The small oasis I had created was thriving just like me, and for the first time in a long time, I realized that I had built something more beautiful than I had ever given myself credit for. I parked the car and stepped out, breathing in the fresh air. The house felt welcoming, as though it was waiting for me to return, waiting for me to find my way back to the life I had made. I walked inside, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the hallway. The house was quiet, peaceful. It was exactly what I needed, but even in the stillness, I knew the work wasn't over. The real journey had just begun. Thomas may have been out of my life, but the ghosts of our past still lingered. I could feel them, the lingering resentment, the years of hurt and silence, all waiting to be dealt with. There would be no simple resolution, no moment where everything magically fell into place. But I knew this much. I was ready to face whatever came next. I had the strength now. The phone rang, breaking my thoughts. I picked it up without looking at the caller ID, knowing exactly who it was. Margaret. David's voice came through, steady and calm. He had been my family's lawyer for decades. He knew the business inside and out, knew Thomas's will, knew everything there was to know about the life we had built. I've been trying to reach you. I sank down onto the couch, exhaling slowly. I'm here, I said, my voice a little softer than I expected. There was still so much to process, so much to untangle. Listen, I've been in touch with the bank and a few of the business partners. The situation with the property with Thomas's will, it's going to take time, but I've already started the process of securing everything for you. I'm moving quickly, but I wanted to give you a heads up. I closed my eyes, letting his words settle in. The business, the land, the legacy, it was all mine now. But it wasn't just about money or property. It was about control. It was about taking back what had been stolen from me, the chance to rebuild, to move forward, and to honor Thomas in a way that felt right for me. I appreciate it, David, I said, my voice firm, resolute. I'm ready for whatever comes next. You're sure? His voice softened, and I could hear the concern in it. This isn't going to be easy, Margaret. There are people involved, people who don't want things to go the way you want them to. I've dealt with worse, I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. I've been to the edge and back. I'm not afraid anymore. David was silent for a moment, and I could sense his understanding. I'll keep you updated then. But know that I'm handling everything. You're not in this alone. I set the phone down, my mind swirling with the implications of his words. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It wasn't about the property or the land or the money. It was about taking back my life, my future. It was about proving once and for all that I was more than what Thomas, and anyone else, had ever thought I could be. The children came in, their energy filling the space as they dropped their toys onto the floor. "Grandma," one of them called, their face lit up with excitement. "Can we play outside?" I smiled at them, my heart swelling with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "Of course," I said, standing up. "Let's go outside." As they ran ahead, their laughter ringing through the house, I couldn't help but feel a quiet peace settle over me. Today had been a turning point, yes. But it was also the beginning of something new. I wasn't just rebuilding a life. I was creating one from the ground up. A life that was mine. A life where I was free. And as I watched the children race around the garden, playing in the sunlight, I realized something important. The future was mine to shape. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what it might hold. Even after all the noise had faded, after the conversations died down and the guests went home, I sat alone in the quiet of my garden that evening. The air was cool, the scent of earth and lavender drifting gently through the night. The children were asleep inside, their laughter still echoing faintly in my mind. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to simply breathe, slowly, deeply, without fear of what tomorrow might bring. The baby shower had started as someone else's story, but somehow it had ended as mine. Not because I had wanted revenge, not because I had wanted to prove a point, but because I had needed to remind myself, and everyone else, that my life was far from over. People love to talk about resilience as if it's something you're born with. But it's not. It's something you build, quietly, painfully, one broken piece at a time. It's forged in moments when you think you can't go on but do anyway. It's born out of the times you are humiliated, forgotten, left behind, and still choose to rise. And that's what I did. I rose. I thought back to the years after the divorce, when I had nothing but a few boxes, a small apartment, and an ocean of silence. Everyone had assumed I'd crumble, that I'd disappear into the background, that I'd become the sad cautionary tale whispered about at dinner tables. But I didn't. I built something beautiful out of the wreckage. I learned how to live again, how to smile again, how to forgive, not the people who hurt me, but myself, forever believing that their opinions defined me. Life has a way of teaching you lessons in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes it breaks you just so you can discover what you're really made of. Sometimes it strips everything away so you can rebuild something stronger, something real. That was my journey. I lost everything, my marriage, my reputation, my sense of belonging. And yet, through it all, I found something priceless. Myself. The woman I am now isn't the same one who stood trembling on the edge of heartbreak years ago. She's older, wiser, softer in some ways, harder in others. She's learned that kindness doesn't mean weakness, and that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. She's learned that peace isn't something you find. It's something you create, one decision at a time. As I looked out over my garden, I realized that every bloom, every plant I had nurtured over the years was a reflection of that lesson. Growth isn't instant. It takes time, care, and patience. It takes faith in the unseen. And maybe that's the greatest lesson life has taught me, that healing is a slow, steady bloom. You can't rush it. You can only tend to it. I thought of Thomas then, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a kind of quiet acceptance. He had been a chapter in my story, not the whole book. Maybe he had loved me once. Maybe he had forgotten how. But in the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had loved myself enough to let go. To anyone listening to my story, I want to tell you this. Pain doesn't define you. People's judgments don't define you. What defines you is what you do after the pain, how you rise, how you rebuild, how you learn to love again, even when it feels impossible. There will be people who betray you, people who underestimate you, people who walk away when you need them most. Let them. Their absence is just making room for your strength to grow. You don't need their approval to shine. You don't need their validation to be enough. You already are enough. That's the truth I wish I had known years ago. It would have saved me so many sleepless nights, so many tears. But then again, Maybe I had to go through all of it to become the woman sitting here tonight. The woman who has learned that peace isn't given, it's earned. I reached down and picked up a small rose that had fallen from the bush beside me. Its petals were soft, its scent light and sweet. I smiled, realizing how much this simple flower mirrored my own story. It had grown through thorns, through storms, through seasons that tried to break it, and still, it had bloomed. That's what I want to leave behind. Not bitterness, not anger, but a legacy of strength. A reminder to anyone who hears my voice that no matter how much you lose, no matter how deeply you're hurt, you can always begin again. You can always choose yourself. So, if you're listening to this, if you're sitting in your own quiet place, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, remember this. You will. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. One sunrise at a time, one act of courage at a time, one moment of choosing peace instead of pain, and when that moment comes, when you finally see yourself not as a victim, but as the survivor you were always meant to be, smile. Because that's the moment you're truly free. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own strength, I invite you to stay a while. Subscribe, share your story, and tell me where you're listening from. Maybe you'll get a shout out in the next one. But most of all, take a moment to remind yourself of this. You are not defined by what broke you. You are defined by how you rise,